Well, today we're going to talk about dreams and fantasies, and those dreams and fantasies that we've held on to for a very, very long time. In my case, it's England. Truly, it's the Cotswolds of England. I can look back and see photos of myself back when I was just 40 years old and sitting on a stoop in the middle of Chipping Camden in England. And I had this vision, this dream of myself living there, living in the little village, gardening, some sort of a small old home, manor house, of course, that I was going to live in. And I started to wonder, why do we carry fantasies? Why do we carry these dreams with us, sometimes through the decades? What is that all about? Remember the movie Baby Boom? Diane Keaton was in it, and who doesn't love Diane Keaton? Such a loss. But she was in this movie, Baby Boom, and the movie was about a female executive, I believe in the consulting field, who had these incredible hours, but every night she would lay in bed and look through the advertisements of beautiful rural homes in Vermont. Now, Vermont's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, but the contrast of this female executive and a rural home in Vermont is kind of interesting. And I think it relates to our conversation today because sometimes our fantasies or our dreams are so different from what our real life is and what's even possible. So today I'm going to take you on a sort of come with me to the gardens of a few gardens up in the Cotswolds of England, where we're going to step into somebody else's fantasy with the hope that we will gain more clarity and understanding. What is it we are seeking? And I'm going to propose that it's not necessarily a person, it's a lifestyle. And that maybe, just maybe, we can bring a bit of that lifestyle into our own lives, no matter where we are. So come with me, let's get started. This is Hidcote. It is truly one of England's most celebrated gardens. And I have to say, upon arriving, everything felt like it was slowing down. This is an amazing, actually historic garden in England. It was the transition between the French symmetrical, very organized gardens into the British garden concept, which was more about creating small rooms, and it was messier, it was freer, more organic. It was started by a man with a vision, really, and every path throughout this garden really invites you to wander and to think. And that was his vision. Doorways all over the place. It's crazy. You know, one thing I have to say is the man who created Hidcote wasn't simply planting flowers. He was creating experiences in each one of these different rooms. He was also a great entertainer. And I'll show you a little bit of the inside of the house. But he entertained all of the very famous people of that particular time period. And when you look at his garden, you see that this was about people coming and staying in his home and him entertaining these people because all the different garden rooms, quote unquote, were where people could gather, places where people could gather, could talk, could rest, could celebrate. And that made me realize that beautiful places don't happen by accident. They just, even though they look organic, they don't happen organically. Someone has to imagine them first. And it was at Hidcote, I have to share with you, that I was introduced to something I've never heard of before, and that is a haha. I actually almost walked into the haha, and I'll try to put up a photograph of what it looks like. But it's like taking out, let's say, imagine a hill that curves downward. And instead of letting that hill curve gently downward, it actually cuts off the hill at one of its highest points, drops it straight down, and then levels it out to whatever the terrain is below. And you might wonder, what was this for? It was actually a great fence line to keep the animals on one side and have the people enjoy the garden on the other side without interrupting the view with some sort of a fence. It's an amazing concept. It makes you wonder, where did this come from? And but I found it so interesting, and the fact that it's called a haha, you just have to believe many people fell into the haha, right? Because it sounds like a punchline more than landscape design. Yes, and the ha-has that I saw actually were quite the fall. We're talking about several meters, which would be 6 feet or more of a drop off. And it truly is a drop off. So whoever named it clearly was brilliant, but also had a sense of humor. So, anyways, take your time, breathe in what is Hidcote. As I wandered through Hidcote and almost fell in the haha, I kept asking myself something. Why has this little place in England captured my attention for so long? It's like I'm home when I'm there. It's very strange. I've lived in Minneapolis. I lived in Winter Park, Florida. I've lived in Boston. I've lived in San Francisco. I've lived in LA. I've lived all over the place in my adult life. I've been married. I've been divorced. I've been a career woman. I've been a stay-at-home mom. All these different roles. Now I'm a grandmother and I'm doing crazy YouTube videos, right? But yet somehow this little corner of England in the Cotswolds has quietly followed me through every chapter of my life, every place I've lived. And every time I go back, I think to myself, I'm home. So what is that about? Because the likelihood of me owning a Cotswold manor is like zilch, zilch. So I have to uncover, peel away, what is that all about? And I want you to do the same thing with whatever it is that you've carried with you for a very long time. And you know you can't actually do it, whatever it is, but you want to know what's with that? Why is that with me all this time? And I realized it's the life that I imagined inside of it. Walking through gardens, learning to garden, creating gardens. Much of it is about creativity because it's both about creating the home and creating the garden. And it's also about community, which I think is really interesting for me to realize. It's about being close to a small town or a village where everyone kind of knows each other. And when I would go on walks, people would say, hello to me and know something about me. Now I know there's pros and cons to living in small places where everyone knows everyone and everyone's in everyone's business. But yet there's a craving within that fantasy, within that dream that has to do with community. I think maybe it's having, a dinner party or a luncheon gathering out at a table in my garden with friends around it where I can share my cooking and I can share my gardening and the beauty that surrounds us, but also the community that connects us. There, as I said, there's also a strong element of creativity that I'm craving. And that's what I feel when I go to the Cotswolds. Having that time to think, having that time to create, and welcoming people into my home. So I realized this dream, and I want you to think about this because it impacts you. I know you're all carrying something, maybe not the same kind of dream, but some kind of a dream or a fantasy that you've carried with you through multiple generations or decades, do we want to call it that? Chapters of your life. It's much bigger than just a house. It's much bigger than just a garden. It's much bigger even than a certain kind of career. So let's try to uncover, unpeel what that is. Our next garden, and I'm going to say this completely wrong, I'm sure pronounce it wrong, Miserden. And it's an amazing, amazing garden. Very, very different from Hidcote. But I want to take you there because there's a couple of things in that garden that I think opened up, for me anyways, the connection to this fantasy. And I hope it does for you too. So let's go. Okay, so we are now at Miserden, which, as you can see, it's a very, very different terrain. And we are in a particular area of the Cotswold actually called I think it's called the Golden Valley. Quite interesting, much hillier or broadly hilly, if that makes any sense. And the gardens just kind of flow into the landscape. The home is spectacular. We're talking I think 1600s is when the center of this home was built, and then obviously added on to multiple times, multiple generations. But you see that the gardens kind of flow into the landscape and it's much more open. I found it fascinating. And there are two things that I want to share with you because I think they're so cool. Number one is the grass steps that were built right into the hillside. And that was designed by Edwin Lutyens, who's a famous landscape designer in England. But look at those steps. Hopefully, I can put that up so that you can see it. Imagine thinking to yourself, rather than putting stones in that step and building a normal staircase, what if I did it with grass? And then also to think about how to maintain that so that everything doesn't slide down the hill, right? Fascinating. I stood there, looking at those steps and thinking, I would never in a million years have imagined doing that. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts of travel is not simply seeing those beautiful places and beautiful architecture, beautiful gardens, but also observing it and then having it expand your own imagination. Incredible. Showing you possibilities that you didn't even know existed. Then there was this tree, and I have to share with you because there were a couple of gardens in the Cotswolds where we saw these particular trees, and I've never seen them before. And they're called the handkerchief trees. All of you Brits know exactly what they are, but as you can see, and hopefully I can put up a photograph for you to see, these little white flowers, I guess they are, sheets that hang down from the tree. And thank gosh that we were able to be there at the right time to see this. But they look like little handkerchiefs hanging from all different branches of the trees. Loved those. Again, expanding one's imagination. And how cool it's called it a handkerchief tree. Another day, we stopped off at Daylesford Farm. And Daylesford, I've spoken of in a number of other videos as well as over on Substack. It was founded by Carol Bamford. I've shared a lot about Carol, but I'll talk about her in just a minute. At first glance, it's just an extraordinary farm shop. Gardens are everywhere, with all kinds of vegetables growing no matter where you look. And then there's a shop in the actual, as you walk in, where one side is all food. You've got the butcher, you've got cheeses and produce that is just absolutely beautiful, that all comes from the Daylesford farm. But on the other side, you see beautiful but very casual, I call it casual tableware. And when I think about, having that garden table, set for all of my friends to have a little garden party, this is what I imagine. Beautiful embroidered tablecloths, casual kind of pottery rather than fine china. It was spectacular. Everything is very expensive, I have to say, but beautiful. So it gives you all kinds of ideas if you can't afford, the Daylesford products, which now are in the United States. I'm sure they're in everywhere else, but the US has been a little bit slow. But they're just opening, I think, a pop-up in New York that they are exploring. But it was just spectacular. It truly was. And I share this with you because of the woman who actually imagined all of this. Carol Bamford decided after her children had all left the house, so to speak, that she had to do something. And so she started out by creating an organic farm. And one idea birthed another. And she ended up being, I think, just a mainstay of the Cotswolds, because now there's a farm, there's a shop, there's restaurants. You can actually stay in one of the Daylesford cottages. It's home goods. There's spas. There's everything. In fact, in London, I go to the Daylesford spa that's in Chelsea for facials because this organic philosophy or organic mission, I should say, has been carried through everything, whether it's what you put on your face to what you eat. And so, what you put in your body and what you put on your body. And all of her tableware really reflects that connection to nature. Now, she now at this point has an entire lifestyle brand, not because someone handed her that blueprint, but what I love is that she knew she didn't want to coast through midlife. And instead, one thing led to another. What she did is she followed her curiosity, which is, what we all want to do. And truly everything starts out that way. Someone quietly asks, what if? Rather than not now. I love that. Next, on our way out of London, we stopped for lunch at the loveliest little garden shop with a restaurant right in the middle of it. It is called Petersham Nurseries. It's actually in Richmond. Nothing about it was grand, nothing was extravagant, and yet it was incredibly beautiful. I would highly recommend that place for anyone to visit if you don't even have to love gardens, but you just love this experience that you get when you're in a place that I think nurtures creativity. Beautiful, all kinds of items. Nothing was incredibly expensive, but beautiful things, plates and water pitchers and vases. And it was really quite incredible. I actually, as did many of the people on the tour, I purchased this bracelet that is so cool. I'll show it to you on the video when you get to see me. But we had lunch there, and I'm going to put up a picture of the lunch table because it was spectacular. Sharon Santoni just does beautiful things. Here we were, a group of women. A few of them knew each other, sort of, but not many. And here we were in this incredible room, tea room, and the conversation just flowed. People were talking about all sorts of things. But what was so interesting is that everywhere you looked, there was something of beauty, and that makes us smile. When we see pretty things, we smile. Absolutely. And I have to say, that environment brought me closer to my dream than any manor house did. It really helped me to kind of open up. What is it I'm seeking in the middle of all of these fantasies? And sometimes we think that our next chapter requires some sort of a dramatic reinvention. In my case, picking up and moving to England. I did that with Paris, so why don't you do that with England, Sharri? But I've learned through the last probably 6, 7, 8 years that maybe that's not what our next chapters are all about. Maybe it's just that we simply get to know ourselves more. And so when we peel the onion, so to speak, maybe we're actually peeling the onion of ourselves and we're peeling away all the things that we think we should have or that people around us would be impressed by. And we get closer to what is it that we're really about? What is it that really matters to us? And what is it that we absolutely want to bring into our lives? Okay, I have to show you the little bracelet that I purchased at Petersham Nurseries. They came in all different kinds of colors, but you can see it's all things from a garden, basically. You've got the dragonfly, you've got flowers, a little lady. I don't know what she symbolizes. Butterflies. I love this. It's a stretchy material. Some of you creative folks could figure out how to make these, but everybody on the tour was purchasing these, which I thought was so fun. But here's what surprised me most is that what was this dream all about? What has this dream all been about? I don't think I'm ever going to own a manor house in the Cotswolds unless, I win the lottery. But honestly, I don't think I need to. You know, our dreams just never arrive in our lives exactly as we imagine them, do they? We've all lived long enough to have all kinds of small dreams, and they never end up exactly as we imagine them, right? They just gently, I say, point us in a direction towards a life that fits us or a life we have to try on, so to speak. So walking through all these gardens, I hope you got some of the same feelings that I did actually being in those gardens, and now seeing even the photos. I still get those feelings, and I hope you've got the same thing. And that is, we don't need to move to England to get those kinds of feelings. You know, it just means that we want to create, if you felt that connection, it means that we really seek to create a life with more beauty. And as crazy as the world is today, and as complicated as it is, maybe that's all we need. Maybe beauty helps to calm us. Maybe beauty is the elixir to chaos, if you want to call it that. Those breadcrumbs that I followed as I walked through the gardens in the Cotswolds led me somewhere I never in a million years would have expected. And that is, it's kind of a sneak preview, a tiny 100-year-old Cape Cod house back in Minneapolis. And a house that strangely captures some of the feelings that I've been chasing for over 30 years. And I'll be sharing that journey with you very soon. And as you all know, it involves decorating because that's something that I love, but also understanding what is the feelings that I want to create in this next chapter of my life and what's different about it. I say that because sometimes we think, oh, we retire, and so then we enter into a chapter. And that chapter is this long chapter, hopefully, that we have until we pass. But actually, that long chapter is built of, or inside of it is many little chapters. And this is another little chapter. So we'll see. Let me leave you, though, with one question, and this is a big question. What fantasy have you been quietly carrying for years? I shared with you mine. What is yours? And if it isn't really about the place, what kind of a life is it that is, you're being invited to create no matter where you live? And if you'd like to continue this conversation, come over to Substack. Join me over on Substack. There's both a free version as well as the salon table. And at the salon table, we go deeper. That's the biggest difference. And, I really want to see you all over there because it's a place where we can have more of a dialogue rather than me just sharing my ideas. So until next time, don't stop listening to the dreams that you have carried with you for a very long time, maybe since you were a little girl. They may know something that you don't know yet. So let's go there. Take care, everyone. A biento.